Hello everyone, my name is Jody and I will be your host. Today we will be looking at regional reports for the area of Douglas County in Oregon. When my dad was about 8 years old, in July of 1956, his family moved to Douglas County, located in the Cascade Mountains of Oregon. His dad was a logger. They had two lakes near them, Diamond Lake and Lamolo Lake. He said on this day he had had half a day at school, so he headed home about 1 p.m. He took a trail that goes around Lamolo Lake that he wasn't allowed to take because it was close to the logging camp. It was a clear, sunny summer's day, not far from Dread and Terror Ridge. He headed down the trail and suddenly halted when at the bottom of the trail he saw something crouched down drinking from the lake. It was less than 200 feet away from him on the same side of the lake. He described the Sasquatch as having been in excess of 6.5 feet, the height of his father. It was brown to tan colored, not the color of the black bears common to the area. He also said the animal had a massive build and a flat face. It was hunkering down in berry bushes on the side of a creek, possibly Pool Creek. As soon as he had seen it, the creature stood up straight as a man and stared right at him. The minute my dad realized it wasn't a man or a bear, he ran right back up that trail. When I asked him about this story today to get the details, he said that during the 3 or 4 months they lived there that year, he'd heard loud screeching, howling noises once in a while that he didn't recognize to be any animal he had ever heard. He never told anyone what he saw, since he wasn't supposed to be in the area. In July of 1978, when I was just 7 years old, I traveled to Oregon with my family to visit relatives. We spent 3 weeks in the state, and I was lucky enough to see what I think was a Bigfoot. We had camped between Reedsport and Florence in an area called the Oxbow Burn. It was dense and close to a shallow river. It was almost like the camp was a bald spot with a wall of brush and trees around it. There was a trail that led to the shallow river, and although it probably wasn't far, it seemed so to me. The late afternoon was sunny and warm, and everyone but my cousin, my uncle, and myself went to look for herds of elk. We had campers to sleep in, and my uncle and my cousin were both napping when the sighting occurred. I was outside one of the campers playing when I heard a rustling of underbrush. I never smelled anything that I could remember or heard a sound other than the rustling. When I looked up, I noticed that a small sapling, maybe the size of the end of a baseball bat, just bent completely over. The sapling was behind a thick wall of what appeared to be a berry bush. I'm not sure what kind. I was curious and walked over to where I'd seen the sapling bent over, thinking there was a squirrel hanging onto it or something. That was the same moment a large hand reached out from behind this brush and grabbed a handful of berries. I was 8 or 10 feet away at the time. The hand was huge, with long reddish-brown hair. It was clear it was a hand and not a paw. I stood there in total shock. When I managed to run, I ran for my life. It did not chase me or anything, but I saw all that I wanted to see of it. The hand was scary enough. I probably would have died of fright had I seen the rest of it. I got back into camp, which was not far away. I never screamed or made a sound. I just ran and sat as close to that camper as I could. I realized when I sat down that I'd wet my shorts. I was 7 years old and I'd never done that before. I kept my mouth shut until my mother and the rest of the family got back from elk sightseeing. I told them everything and they told me it must have been a bear. I described the color of the hair, and I was told this area only had black bears, so it must have been black. I wasn't stupid. I knew the difference between a hand and a paw, and the difference between reddish brown and black. I let them convince me that it must have been a bear anyway, and we left and came back to our home state of Mississippi. A few years later, when I was in the 6th grade, I found a library book with a black cover, and if I'm not mistaken, the title was Bigfoot. I hurried to check it out and read it from cover to cover. It wasn't until that moment I figured out that that animal that I had seen those years ago had a name. I had never been so excited in my life. Ever since, I have been interested in all sightings, shows, books, etc. I've thought about telling my story for years, but I, like everyone else, had been afraid of the teasing and skepticism of others. My family says, "We believe that you believe what you saw." I'll believe it until the day I die. I am 29 now, and I hope that the mystery will be solved in my lifetime. My husband and my son believe me more than my family at the time. I am very genuine and honest, and I would never lie about something like that. I left Oklahoma City with my 2 brothers, Bobby and Jimmy, and a friend named John, and we headed for the state of Oregon in August of 1979 for a possible long-term stay. After a 5-day drive, we came to the small town of Drain, Oregon, where Jimmy had been a few years earlier with his ex-wife and child. After about 3 weeks, we settled in and everything was looking pretty good for us. A couple of months passed by, and one early morning in October, I got up and asked my brother Jimmy if he knew of a place to go deer hunting. He told me that he'd been to a place a few years ago just outside of a small town called Yoncalla, a few miles south of Drain on Highway 99. So we took off to go check out the area. We drove south of Yoncalla about 2 to 3 miles and turned to the west on an old logging road. We went up the road for about 2 miles and came to a fork in the road, and at the time I asked Jimmy, "Do I go right or left?" He told me it doesn't matter. So I turned right, and the road ended at the top of the mountain about 2 more miles up. The road that turned left at the fork ended at the top of the mountain about 300 to 500 yards away. Jimmy and I got out of the car for a nature call, and after about 20 seconds, Jimmy told me to look over on the other ridge. He saw something move. I looked and I told him, I don't see anything. About 10 seconds later, Jimmy told me, "Look, I saw something move." I looked and told him that and that's all I could say. At that time, we saw a big black thing walking like a man. It walked over to the edge of the other ridge, the ridge we would have been on if we'd taken a left at the fork in the road. It was standing there for about 10 to 20 seconds before it walked back to where we first saw it. When it stopped, it turned and looked at us for about 30 seconds, then turned away. That's when I saw a little one standing there beside it. We watched as they walked away from us over the mountain. The big one was about 6 to 7 feet tall and about 300 to 400 pounds. The smaller one was about 4 to 5 feet tall and probably about 100 to 150 pounds. The animals were tall, muscular, and walked as a wrestler would. The larger one had arms longer than a man's. The younger, smaller one, only a little lighter in color than the other. Both were very dark, with the larger one near black in color. Both had rounded heads like a human. After we got over the shock, Jimmy and I left and drove down to the fork in the road and saw a man on a horse. We stopped and asked the man if his horse was acting funny or if he saw anything strange. He pulled out a big pistol and told us he was not worried about it. I think the Bigfoot was looking at him when it walked over to the side of the mountain and looked down. We stopped in the town of Yoncalla to get something to drink and told some of the people there, and they didn't care to talk about it, so we left. I hope you take this story seriously because you are the first that I've told it to in a long time. I've always wondered, why me? Why did I see it? I went deer hunting with my teenage son in September of 1979 near Tokenie Falls. We got to camp, and after hiking around and having dinner, we realized we'd forgotten our tent poles. It was a warm fall night, so we settled to sleep on the ground, and we didn't have a campfire due to the dry conditions. I was sound asleep when I felt something touching my beard. I had a very heavy beard, mustache, and long hair at the time. It was gently rubbing fingers through my beard, not as if it was intending to wake me, only trying to figure out who or what I was. I would liken it to a blind person touching the contours of your face to try and see you. For some reason, I was thinking of a squirrel or other critter. I did notice an odor like burnt hair and decomposing meat, very strong. I sat up and roared to spook whatever it was away. It took off into the heavy brush. I could hear it crashing through the brush on two legs. It was big and heavy, very noticeable. As soon as I was oriented, I grabbed a flashlight to look for tracks and saw none. This was not a visual sighting. It was experienced through scent, touch, and sound. After speaking with others who have had experiences in the woods, I strongly feel that I encountered a Bigfoot that evening. This was a long time ago. September of 1980, but I have never forgotten that day. I can still clearly see the beast. I was about 15 and my friend and I went hiking in the hills between these two neighboring towns of Sutherland and Oakland, Oregon. It was in the fall. I believe we were just about to go back to school for the year. It was a pretty warm day. We stopped along the way to take a restroom break. We were on some logging roads, or they may have been fire control roads put there by the BLM. But anyway, we were on a curve in the road. We knew there were probably other people in the area, and so we each posted a watch out while the other of us did our business. I was watching out for her and walked a little ways back down the road the way we had just come when I heard a noise. I looked up just in time to see what I thought must have been a bear. It was on the other side of a clearing across the road, coming down a very steep embankment. It was near the top, very dark brown or black in color, and was crashing down the embankment through some small trees in an upright position. I knew it was not a man. It did not have clothes on or anything like that. It was big and hairy. It started from the top of the steep embankment and crashed downwards, almost in our direction. I could hear the thump, 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 thump of its steps very clearly, along with all the crashing of the brush. It was doing this in an upright position, taking huge steps. I was stunned for a moment, then I screamed, and it stopped and looked in my direction. I ran. My girlfriend was still around the corner, and she screamed too. I was yelling, "Bear! Bear! Bear!" and we both hurried off in the other direction. She asked me what I saw, and I told her. We speculated on it for much of the rest of our long hike. I convinced myself that it must have been a bear. Later that night, I told my father about our close call with the bear, and when I told him what I had seen and what it did, he told me it must have been a man because bears did not ever walk upright, and definitely not upright down a hillside. That is when I came to the conclusion that it must have been a Bigfoot. In August of 2002, I was walking in the woods behind my house, in Looking Glass, during the late afternoon evening. I was enjoying the late summer weather when suddenly I heard something stir in the brush several yards ahead of me. I walked silently for a few yards, daring not to get too close, and I hear more rustling. It was moving away now, and then out of nowhere it appeared ahead of me. I don't think I've ever seen any bipedal thing that tall or hairy. Of course, I wasn't right next to it, with the animal being about 20 yards away. The creature was dark brown, almost black, and hairy. Its face and muscular structure resembled an ape, but it was bipedal like a human. Its upright appearance looked more like a human. I estimate the height as being close to 8 feet. It stood with a slight slouch. It looked me dead in the eyes, with the most sinister look. I took a step back, and the creature slowly turned and departed back inside the tree line. I noticed a horrible odor like a skunk, but much stronger. I was 12 at the time, but I know what I saw. I followed the animal's route several days later, for about 20 yards after it disappeared, and found a faint footprint. It was enough to make out the characteristics: 5 toes, and I would estimate that it was larger than Shaq's foot by a long shot. I walked along the fence line for a while, and I couldn't see any holes. There were some parts of the fence, though, that the animal could have just stepped over, being that big. Although I've heard of other sightings in the area, I haven't seen another one, but I do hear strange howling at night sometimes. I was driving home from work a year ago, in December of 2002. It was about midnight, and I was driving on Highway 138 heading east, about 15 miles out of Roseburg. As I rounded a curve in the road, I saw what I thought was a deer way up ahead crossing the road. I slowed down a bit as I got to where I thought the deer would be. What I saw was a figure standing just off the road by a fence, with one hand on the fence post, and it turned as I went by, watching me. I thought it was a man, so I stopped to see if he needed help. I got out of my truck with my flashlight in hand and started walking back towards the man. I was working the light beam along the fence line when I heard the most god-awful sound I've ever heard in my life. I froze. I was in the military, and I work as a psychiatric nurse, and I don't scare easily, but that scream scared the crap out of me. It sounded like a dying cap in a hailstorm. It was ranging in tone, starting out high-pitched, then ending up as a threatening, low-pitched, guttural sound. I dropped my flashlight and ran back to my truck and spun tires getting out of there. The next day, on my way to work, I stopped at the same spot. My flashlight was still there. I didn't notice any footprints, but did see the tall grass had been walked through on the other side of the fence. I looked on all the fence posts in the area where I saw it, but did not see any evidence of hair. As to what it looked like, I only got a brief look as I went by. But it had to be at least 7 feet tall. I base this on the fact that I drive a Dodge Ram, and when I'm sitting in the driver's seat, my head's about 6 feet off the ground. The spot where this thing stood is in a depression in the ground. When I park my truck in that spot and stand where it stood, I can't see into the cab at all. And yet, that night, I saw it. Its head was even with mine. I was looking directly out the window, not slightly up or down. I couldn't make out features as it was dark, but the lights in my pickup slightly illuminated the area where it stood as I went by. As I said, I thought it was a man at first who needed help. It looked so human at that moment. It wasn't until later that I came to believe it couldn't have been a man. No man could have made that sound. What I remembered seeing was a figure standing next to the fence. Its head followed me as I went by. It didn't appear to have shoulders. It looked like the head just spread out until it became shoulders. It appeared to have long hair all over. At first I thought it was a long jacket like a duster, but as I looked back it had to be fur. But it was the scream that stands out in my mind. It was like a warning. Don't come any closer. At least that was the message I got. I hope you enjoyed today's stories. Be sure to stay tuned for part 2 of the Douglas County Regional Reports, which will feature my own encounters. So make sure you subscribe so that you get a notification when that gets posted. You can like our page on Facebook, facebook.com/Bigfoot Witness Accounts. Be sure to give us a like and subscribe and help us grow, because we'd love to come back and keep doing this for you. It was a lot of fun. I hope everybody has a great day, and until next time, believe the witness. If you have had an encounter and would like to talk to an empathetic witness, you can email me at bigfootwitnessaccounts@gmx.com.